Brats. Chapter 16. Bye, Isabel, Rosie said on Thursday afternoon, waving to the stoic iguana in her classroom forest habitat. See you tomorrow, Rosie, Ms. Gumta said, smiling as the students filed out into the hall. Rosie waved to her teacher as she walked out, Victor trailing behind. Ever since the day at Victor's house, Rosie had been spending time with him at school. Mostly it was okay, maybe even good. Victor often had excellent ideas, like trying to dig an underground tunnel on the playground and being super spy ninjas in gym class. But he didn't always want to play the things Rosie chose, like ball tag or swinging as high as possible on the swing set. Dad said Rosie should remember Victor had his own thoughts and feelings and to respect them. But Rosie secretly thought Victor would be more fun if he'd just do what she wanted. I have a new lead to help you find Buddy, Victor said. This was good news because no one else cared about finding Buddy. What is it? Rosie asked, only the tiniest bit wary that he might be trying to take over. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but then stumbled forward, almost falling, as a fifth grader rushed past and accidentally slammed Victor with her backpack. Watch it, Rosie said sharply. She grabbed Victor to steady him. She might have some doubts about Victor, but she certainly wasn't going to allow anyone to run him over in the hallway. Despite the loud chatter and laughter in the crowded hallway, Rosie's voice carried, and the fifth grader glanced back. Sorry. Despite the loud chatter, Are you okay? Rosie asked Victor, now that she'd straightened that out. Victor nodded, but glanced nervously behind him a few times as they walked out of school. That was the thing about Victor. He was what Dad would call a warrior. That meant he was always thinking about the bad things that could happen. Rosie usually thought being a warrior was very silly. Why bother about bad things that probably wouldn't even happen anyway? But now, as she watched Victor's wary expression, she wondered if maybe Victor worried because his dad was hurt and far away in the German hospital. Maybe if a bad thing like that happened, it made you feel like other bad things could happen too. And that made Rosie think that if any fifth graders knocked into Victor, she would knock them right back, and hard. So what's the lead you found out? She asked as they reached the first corner and waited for the crossing guard to give them the all clear to cross the street. Dad put her hair in braids that morning, and she twisted one of them around her finger. About Buddy. Yesterday we got some good news, Victor said. My dad is awake. He's still very sick and has trouble with remembering, but my Aunt Carmen said this is a big step. That's great news, Rosie agreed, delighted. She wasn't sure what it had to do with Buddy, but she was very happy for her friend. Victor nodded, his eyes shining. Yes, and Aunt Carmen decided we needed to send him a care package with his favorite chocolate bar. She said chocolate can help people remember. Rosie had not heard this before, but it made a lot of sense because something as tasty as chocolate could probably help just about anything. And when we went to the post office to mail it, Victor continued, we saw a sign about a missing dog. He beamed, clearly proud at his detective work. Was it Buddy, Rosie asked eagerly, or Pepper? Pepper, Victor said solemnly. The sign said she's a Cocker Spaniel puppy. Rosie sucked in a sharp breath. This means Pepper, like Buddy, had now been missing for days. Pepper's owner lives around the corner from us, Victor continued. He was rifling around in his shorts pocket as he spoke. Her name is Miss James, and I wrote it all down in case you want to go talk to her. He produced a crumpled piece of paper and handed it to Rosie. This is a great lead, Rosie told him, taking the paper with the name and address printed in careful block letters. I'm going to talk to her right now. This was the evidence she needed to convince Charlotte and Tom that dogs really were disappearing on post. I can go with you, Victor said, shuffling his feet, which Rosie knew meant he was excited. I just have to tell Aunt Carmen. Okay, I'll go tell my dad, and then we can meet in front of my house, Rosie decided. There was no harm in letting Victor come along, especially since he had discovered the lead. Victor walked up the front path of his house, wet from an earlier rain, while Rosie ran and threw open her front door. I'm home, she announced. Cupcake raced over and bounced in joyful circles around Rosie, who gave her a big hug. I'll play with you later, she promised the energetic dog. But I have an important spy mission first. What's that, Rosie Posey? Dad asked, walking into the front hall. I'm letting Victor help me search for Buddy and Pepper, Rosie said, deciding that was enough information for Dad. Wonderful, an afternoon with your new friend, Dad said in a loud, goofy voice. Have a great time. Cupcake looked up with her begging face, clearly not willing to be left behind. And then Rosie had a terrible thought. What if her dog went missing? It was too awful to even imagine. Dad, you'll watch Cupcake while I'm gone, right? She asked. Absolutely, Dad nodded. You just have fun with your friend, and I'll take care of Cupcake. Okay, Rosie said, still slightly anxious about the safety of her beloved dog. Don't worry, Rosie Posey, Dad said, noticing her hesitation, and clearly excited for her to go play with Victor. Cupcake likes to sleep under my desk while I'm working. She'll be fine hanging out there till you get back. Knowing Cupcake would be in the room with Dad and possibly even sitting on Dad's feet, which the big dog always enjoyed, was reassuring. Okay, Rosie agreed, and headed out to meet Victor. As Victor had promised, Miss James lived just around the corner and well within Rosie's boundaries for walking by herself on the base. The yard had the same kind of dog fencing the Baileys had, and as they walked up the path to the front porch, Rosie noticed several holes had been dug around its perimeter. Clearly, Pepper liked to dig, and Rosie felt a wave of distress that poor Pepper was gone now. Rosie rang the bell, and a moment later a woman opened the door. Rosie recognized her immediately from the day at the pool, although this afternoon she wore yoga pants and an old gray t-shirt instead of the blue striped bathing suit. Hi, ma'am, I'm Rosie, and this is Victor, Rosie said, remembering that Mom said introducing yourself was good manners. We saw the sign about your puppy, Pepper, and we're really sorry she's missing, and we wanted to ask you some questions about it. Miss James paused for a moment, as though this was the last thing she had expected when she opened the door. But then she nodded and walked out on the porch with Rosie and Victor. Well, it's nice to meet you both, she said, sitting down on the top step. And I appreciate your sympathy. My husband and I are very worried about Pepper. Can you tell us what happened? Rosie asked as she and Victor sat down next to Miss James. A car drove by slowly and the driver waved at Mr. James. Blah, 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 blah. Stop, Miss Pulliam. Okay. A car drove by slowly and the driver waved at Miss James, who waved back. Well, she was in the yard, Miss James said. I looked out the window right before she went missing, actually, because I heard a strange noise. A man was walking by dragging something that rattled. I didn't see what it was because the fence blocked my view, but I remember seeing Pepper digging a hole, that one right there by the gate. And then when I called her about 30 minutes later, she was gone. Was the gate open? Rosie asked, putting on her detective cap to try and find some clues. She was hoping the information might help them find Buddy, too. Miss James shook her head. Good thought, but no. That was the first thing I checked, she said, and I also checked for loose boards in the fence. But they were all secure. I really don't think she could have escaped on her own. The way she said it made Rosie shudder. So you think someone let her out on purpose? And then something truly terrible occurred to Rosie. Do you think that man dog-napped Pepper? She asked in horror. Miss James shook her head. I'm sure that's not what happened, she said. But Miss James had a look that Rosie recognized. It was a look Mom got when she talked about certain missions in Afghanistan, or the time Rosie asked Dad what it meant when their friend Randy went MIA on a mission in the Middle East. It was the look grown-ups got when they didn't want to tell you something scary. And Rosie knew the scary thing Miss James didn't want to say that a man had stolen Pepper right from her own front yard. Rosie's mind was racing because if Pepper was dognapped by this man, that meant Buddy probably was too. And so the question was now, who would have done such a terrible, awful thing? What did the man look like? Rosie asked, trying to sound casual like a good spy. The one who definitely did not dognap Pepper. Oh, I don't know, Miss James said unhelpfully. Victor had picked up on Rosie's urgency. Was the man a civilian? He asked. The word was an electric zap that made Rosie's heart start pounding extra hard and her whole body tingle, because Rosie was now picturing a very specific civilian, the civilian she and her siblings had seen at the creepy house off Crimson Drive. Yes, Miss James said, pressing a finger to her chin for a moment. Now that I think of it, I noticed he was wearing a brown coat, and it struck me as odd on such a hot afternoon. The electricity cackled through Rosie like a live wire, and all the pieces came together at once. The cages, the meat, the secrecy. The terrible man was dognapping pets, locking them in cages in the basement of the isolated house, feeding them that meat, and then, well, who knew what his evil plan was? But now that she was onto him, Rosie wasn't stopping till she found out. We have to go, she told Miss James as she sprang to her feet and raced down the path. The rain had started up again, but Rosie didn't care. She simply couldn't wait one more minute to tell Charlotte and Tom that she, the youngest Bailey of all, had uncovered the truth about the sinister man and the house on Crimson Drive. Okay, that's all for chapter 16. I'll see you shortly for 17. Happy reading.